Welcome to Terrormouth, where the night doesn't just hold secrets, it remembers them.
In the quietest towns, sheriffs have faced horrors that will haunt you long after the story ends.
Story 1. The last radio call of Sheriff Caldwell, Sheriff Thomas Caldwell, had been the only law in Hawthorne Creek for nearly 20 years. A tiny town of barely 1,500 souls, it sat at the edge of endless forests. A place where the roads narrowed into dirt tracks and cell signals never reached. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, and where the quiet was both comforting and suspicious. But the night of November 3rd, 2007, would prove that even in the quietest towns, horror could wait patiently for decades before it struck. Caldwell was on his last patrol of the night, cruising slowly along Maple Hollow Road, headlights cutting through a thick fog that had rolled in from the surrounding pine forests. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying an unnatural cold that seemed to creep under his jacket. He had done this route 1,000 times, but tonight the road felt different, longer, narrower, almost suffocating. Shadows seemed to stretch and move just beyond the headlights. His radio crackled. "Sheriff, are you on Maple Hollow?" Dispatcher Lynn Carter's voice sounded tense, almost trembling. "Yeah, Lynn, what's going on?" Caldwell replied casually, assuming it was another false alarm from teenagers. "There's someone at the Miller house," she said. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They say they're watching." Caldwell frowned. The Miller's house was on the edge of town, surrounded by trees, long abandoned by any neighbors willing to venture close after sunset. "I'll check it out," he said, already turning the cruiser down the narrow drive. When he arrived, the house was unnaturally silent. Frost coated the lawn, yet there were bare footprints pressed into the ground leading toward the front door. Caldwell's flashlight cut through the fog as he approached, and he noticed the glass in the windows shimmering unnaturally, like tiny ripples of water. Then he saw it, a hand pressed against the window pane. Pale, long fingers, unnaturally thin. He swung the flashlight to illuminate the face behind the glass, but it wasn't there, nothing, just a smudge of darkness, like the absence of light. The hand slowly slid down the glass, leaving streaks and condensation, before vanishing entirely. Before he could react, a scream pierced the night. Caldwell spun toward the neighboring house. The Collins residence. He ran across the yard, heart hammering. The front door hung wide open. Inside, the living room was a scene of chaos. Overturned furniture, shattered photographs, and scratches on the walls that climbed floor to ceiling, deep and jagged, as if something with long, clawed fingers had scaled them. The Collins family was huddled together in the center of the room, eyes wide, trembling, pointing toward a dark corner. "Don't look at it," whispered Mr. Collins. "It doesn't like being seen." Caldwell's flashlight cut through the darkness. Nothing moved. The corner was empty, yet the air felt wrong, oppressive, heavy, almost alive. His own radio crackled. The voice that came through was his own, slowed and warped, repeating a single sentence: "You shouldn't have come alone." The lights flickered and the temperature dropped sharply. Then Caldwell heard the first footsteps, slow, deliberate, above him. On the roof. He looked up. Nothing. Just the black silhouette of the house against the night sky. The wind howled, carrying whispers that seemed to come from inside his own head. He backed toward the door and called into the radio again. "Lynn, I need backup." "Something's wrong," Static answered. Then came a soft, distorted voice, repeating over and over, "The town remembers, It's sheriffs. Caldwell's hands shook. He tried to contact the neighbors, to call someone outside the town limits, but no one answered. The cell signal was gone. Even the car radio emitted only static. The fog pressed in from all sides, swallowing sound, swallowing distance. For hours, though it felt like minutes, he ran through the fog-shrouded streets, checking abandoned homes, chasing shadows that moved just beyond the light of his flashlight. Every so often, a figure appeared at the edge of the woods, pale, tall, faceless. It didn't move toward him, but it didn't move away either. It just waited, watching, waiting, at 1:17 a.m. Caldwell returned to his cruiser, parked near the town square. The engine was gone, the headlights dead, the radio smashed, as if struck from the inside. He looked around. Hawthorne Creek seemed different. Buildings leaned slightly, streets seemed narrower, fog heavier. He realized with growing horror that the town itself had changed. Or maybe he had. From the mist, a low, whispering voice floated. Familiar, intimate, chilling, Sheriff Caldwell. You can't leave. You never leave. He turned to run, but the fog swallowed the path ahead. Shapes emerged, human-like but twisted, limbs bending wrong, faces featureless yet familiar. Some wore old sheriff uniforms, others town clothing from decades past. Caldwell realized the horror. The town didn't just remember its sheriffs. It kept them, trapped them, folded them into the fog, into the woods, into the very buildings by dawn. State investigators found Caldwell's cruiser abandoned at the town square. Engine running, doors wide open. No sign of the sheriff. No footprints leading into the woods or streets. Only the faint tapping of glass echoed in the mist, as if the town itself were watching and waiting for its next guardian or its next victim. Sheriff Caldwell never returned. At least, not in the way anyone would recognize. After that first night, Hawthorne Creek seemed to breathe differently. The fog stayed longer. Shadows clung to corners of streets where there should have been sunlight, and the town itself felt like it had grown teeth, silently watching every passerby for weeks. Investigators searched the forest surrounding Maple Hollow Road, combed the streets, and even scoured abandoned houses. Nothing, no clues, no footprints, no evidence. Just the whispering fog and the stories from terrified residents who claimed to hear footsteps outside their windows, even when no one lived on their streets. Then strange patterns began to emerge. Every sheriff appointed after Caldwell lasted less than 6 months. Some vanished entirely. Others returned months later, babbling incoherently about voices in the fog, faceless figures in the woods, and streets that shifted when no one looked directly at them. Every one of them carried the same story. The town remembers, and it doesn't let go. 1 year later, a young deputy named Rachel Kim was assigned to Hawthorne Creek, determined, skeptical, and trained in modern forensics. She refused to believe the legends. She spent weeks driving Maple Hollow Road at night, checking abandoned houses and reviewing old case files. Then she found Caldwell's patrol log, half-burned in a filing cabinet marked lost. The entries were ordinary at first, routine patrols, minor disturbances, nothing unusual. But the last pages were scrawled in a hand, not entirely human letters, elongated, jagged, as though the pen had been forced across the paper by invisible fingers. And at the very end, they are patient. They wait. Next one won't leave. Rachel laughed nervously. It was the kind of thing you'd expect in a ghost story, until the radio in her cruiser crackled, static, then a voice. Caldwell's voice, clear, calm, familiar, yet impossibly distorted. Deputy, you shouldn't have come. She turned on the lights. Nothing. The road ahead was empty. But the fog rolled in thick and fast, swallowing her headlights, her mirrors, the familiar trees. Shapes began to form in the mist, tall, faceless, standing silently along the roadside. Some wore the faded uniforms of past sheriffs. Others looked like townsfolk from decades ago, faces smooth, blank, unnervingly still. Rachel froze. One of them raised an arm slowly, pointing toward the forest. A voice, not hers but in her head, whispered, "The town remembers its guardians." "You belong now." She tried to start the engine. The car roared, then died. The doors were locked from the outside. The fog pressed in, wet, suffocating, smelling of earth and decay. The shapes advanced, gliding rather than walking, their movements silent but absolute. Rachel understood in that moment. Hawthorne Creek was alive, and it did not forget those who patrolled it. She tried to scream, but the sound vanished into the fog. The last thing she saw before the mist swallowed her completely was a familiar figure, Sheriff Caldwell. Taller, his eyes black pools, faceless now like the others, reaching out to welcome her into the town's eternal night. When the morning came, Hawthorne Creek appeared peaceful once more. Maple Hollow Road gleamed wet in the weak sunlight. Birds chirped. The residents went about their day as if nothing had happened. The police cruiser sat abandoned in the fog, engine running, doors open. No footprints, no body. Only a faint wet sound of tapping on glass echoed from the trees, like a heartbeat, waiting, patient, eternal. And in the files at the station, in letters not entirely human, a single message was scrawled across a page. "Next one won't leave." The town remembered. It always remembered, and the guardians of Hawthorne Creek would never escape. Story 2. The Whistling Woods. Sheriff Harold Grayson had always thought that Willow Bend was a quiet town, nestled between jagged hills and dense pine forests. Its population barely reached 1,000. Crime was rare, and most calls involved loose livestock, trespassing teens, or the occasional car accident. Yet, something had always unsettled Grayson about the woods that framed the town. The locals called it Whistling Woods, named for the eerie wind-like sounds that drifted from its depths. Even on still nights. It was October 21st, 2012, when the first call came. A frantic voice on the town's emergency line reported a missing child near the edge of the forest. Grayson drove to the location immediately, the old cruiser's engine growling in the night. Mist hugged the ground, and the moonlight barely pierced the dense trees. The mother, Mrs. Everett, was pale and trembling. She explained that her son, Tommy, had been playing near the tree line when he suddenly screamed. She swore she saw a tall figure standing just beyond the tree line, its head tilted unnaturally, whistling a slow, hollow tune. She couldn't see a face, only blackness where the features should have been. Grayson's flashlight cut through the fog as he searched. Broken branches crunched under his boots. Then he heard Ither whistling, soft, melodic, almost beckoning. It seemed to move with him, coming from every direction at once. He followed the sound deeper into the forest. The further he went, the more unnatural it became. Shadows moved against the trees, as if the forest itself were alive, reaching for him. And then he saw it. A figure standing motionless in the clearing, impossibly tall, its head cocked at a disturbing angle. Its arms hung loosely, yet the tips brushed the ground, leaving dark streaks in the mist. "Tommy," Grayson called, stepping forward. The figure didn't respond. Then the whistling stopped. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. The hairs on his neck stood on end. He realized the figure wasn't just standing, it was watching him, though it had no eyes. Suddenly, a faint giggle echoed through the trees. Grayson spun around. The boy's voice, or a mimicry. Then he saw multiple small figures emerging from the shadow's children. Their faces were twisted, featureless, whistling that same hollow tune. They circled him, floating rather than walking, their movements jerky and unnatural. Caldwell's instincts screamed at him to retreat, but the forest seemed to shift. Paths twisted, distances stretched. Every step backward felt like moving deeper inside. The whistling grew louder, layered, almost chanting. And then he noticed the trees themselves were shaping around the figures, bending, stretching, forming what looked like faces in the barked hours, past or maybe minutes. Time felt distorted. Finally, Grayson stumbled upon Tommy, or something that resembled him. The boy was standing perfectly still, expressionless, whistling softly. As Grayson approached, the boy's body bent at unnatural angles, limbs elongating like shadows stretching in the moonlight. Before he could react, the whistling intensified, now surrounding Grayson from every direction. A chorus of dissonant tones that tore at his mind. He fell to his knees, clutching his head, and when he looked up, the clearing was empty. Tommy was gone. The forest was still, silent. The next morning, residents found Grayson wandering near the edge of the forest, eyes wide, hands trembling, whispering to himself, "They watch. They always watch. The whistling, it never ends." No one believed him. Tommy was never found, and the whistling woods, as if mocking the town, remained silent for weeks only to begin again when night fell, carrying the faint, haunting sound of 1,000 whistles in the darkness. Asterisk. Sheriff Harold Grayson never truly left the whistling woods that night. For days, he wandered the outskirts of Willow Bend in a daze, muttering to himself, replaying the same vision over and over, the faceless figures, the elongated limbs of the children, the ceaseless whistling that seemed to pierce his mind. The town tried to carry on, dismissing his warnings as the ramblings of a man traumatized by a missing child. But Grayson knew the truth. The forest was alive, sentient, and it hungered for souls to add to its choir. On the third night after the disappearance, Grayson felt compelled to return. The pull was irresistible, a low hum vibrating through his chest, echoing the whistling he had tried to forget. He drove to the edge of the woods, the mist curling round his cruiser-like fingers. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, yet he stepped out, flashlight in hand, as if invisible strings guided his feet. The forest greeted him as if it had been expecting him. Trees shifted slightly, forming doorways and arches. Their bark contorted into featureless faces that seemed to leer and whisper. Shadows moved independently of the moonlight, stretching and bending in ways that defied physics. And then the whistling began, soft at first, almost playful, then growing into a chorus of thousands of voices, layered and dissonant. Echoing through every corner of the mind, Grayson moved deeper, calling out Tommy's name. His voice was swallowed immediately. Then he saw them, the faceless children, standing in a perfect semicircle, their bodies elongated, limbs twitching unnaturally. They whistled in perfect harmony, an impossible tune that made his head spin. "Tommy!" Grayson shouted, running toward the boy he thought he recognized. The figure ahead shifted. For a moment, the moonlight revealed Tommy's face, but it was wrong. Stretched and featureless, his eyes nothing but deep black voids. Then the boy, or the thing pretending to be him, split into multiple figures, each whistling the same bone-chilling melody. They moved as one, circling Grayson, closing in without sound. Grayson's flashlight flickered. When it came back, he saw movement behind the trees. Hundreds of faces formed in the bark, screaming silently, mouths frozen open, eyes featureless yet glaring. The forest itself was alive, feeding on fear, amplifying terror, twisting reality. He realized then that the whistling woods had existed for centuries, collecting souls, keeping them trapped in an eternal, distorted harmony. The sheriff tried to flee. Every step forward was mirrored by the fog wrapping around his ankles, pulling him back. He tripped over roots that seemed to shift under his feet. The whistling became unbearable, resonating in his bones, rattling teeth, vibrating his skull. And then he felt them cold, thin hands gripping his shoulders, lifting him slightly off the ground. The faceless children were no longer shadows, they were solid, yet ephemeral, their elongated limbs wrapping around him like smoke made flesh. A voiced army's voice emerged from the chorus, whispering, "Join us. The song is endless. The forest remembers you." Grayson's vision blurred. Time unraveled. He felt himself stretching, elongating, his limbs bending impossibly, his face melting into featureless darkness. He screamed, but it became part of the whistling, layered into the forest's choir, hours or, perhaps, centuries. The townspeople noticed a new sound at the edge of Willow Bend. The whistling woods had a new melody, richer, deeper, more disturbing. Those who passed the tree line swore they heard the faint echo of Grayson's voice, calling out their names, entwined with the hollow tune of countless children. Tommy was never found. Sheriff Grayson was never seen again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, residents swear they hear whistling in the mist, faint at first, then growing louder, a chorus of hundreds of faceless figures, eternally waiting, eternally singing. And if you are brave enough to step into the whistling woods, you may hear the softest, most familiar whistle beckoning you deeper. One day, the forest will remember you too, adding your voice to its endless, nightmarish harmony. The town sleeps fitfully, unaware that the forest isn't silent, it's watching, listening, and patiently collecting. The whistling woods remembers. It always remembers. Story 3. The Lantern Man of Crimson Creek. Sheriff Daniel McAllister had served Crimson Creek for over 15 years, a town tucked into the hills of northern Vermont. Life there was simple, slow-paced, the kind of place where the townsfolk left their doors unlocked and children rode bikes down empty streets until sunset. But even in sleepy towns, legends lingered, whispered from generation to generation. And some, McAllister had learned, were better left undisturbed. The first report came in the dead of winter. A local farmer, Eli Thompson, called the station around 11:42 p.m. His voice trembled. There's a man walking along the creek, holding a lantern, but he glows wrong." McAllister grabbed his coat and cruiser and drove through the narrow, snow-covered roads to the outskirts of town, where Crimson Creek ran deep between banks of dark pines. He arrived at the site. The snow sparkled under the pale moonlight, untouched, checked for a single line of footprints. unusually long and spaced too far apart for any normal man. And then he saw it, a figure standing by the creek, holding a lantern that cast a sickly green light, flickering unnaturally. The figure swayed slightly, though no wind blew. McAllister called out, but the figure did not respond. The light reflected off the snow, illuminating a face that seemed hollow, almost melting. Eyes black voids with no whites or irises. Before McAllister could react, the figure began moving toward him but not walking. It glided, the snow beneath it untouched. A low humming began, vibrating in McAllister's chest, like the lantern itself was alive. "Stop!" McAllister shouted, hand on his holster, though the shaking of his fingers betrayed his fear. The figure paused, tilted its head, and the humming stopped instantly. Silence descended, absolute and heavy, pressing down on his shoulders. Then he noticed the creek itself was changing. The water, once clear, shimmered unnaturally, reflecting not the moon or stars, but hundreds of faint lanterns, each floating, each with a faceless figure within. The creek seemed to stretch, winding impossibly into darkness. McAllister's radio crackled. Dispatcher Jenner's voice was tense. "Sheriff, reports are coming in from town. People are seeing lights along the streets. Shadows, moving too fast to be human." Before he could respond, the lantern figure raised its arm. In that moment, McAllister felt a pull, as if invisible threads tethered him to the figure. His legs froze. The snow beneath his boots felt soft, like walking on something alive. Whispers filled his mind, hundreds of voices, overlapping, echoing, saying, "Join us. Light guides the way. The creek remembers its own." McAllister struggled to move, finally breaking free, and ran toward the town. But with every step, he noticed something horrifying. The snow behind him reflected not his footprints, but dozens of elongated, inhuman tracks, all converging toward the creek. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the corner of his eyes. By the time he reached the center of Crimson Creek, the streets were empty, silent, yet the air was heavy, vibrating with that unnatural green glow. Residents who had dared peek outside reported flickering lights in their windows, reflections of the lantern man floating along walls, sometimes vanishing before anyone could get close. And then the first disappearance occurred. Mrs. Harding, a widow who lived alone on Maple Street, vanished without a trace. Her door was locked, windows closed, but neighbors swore they saw a lantern-shaped glow moving inside her home, then dissipating into the night. Over the following weeks, reports multiplied, farmers, children, even a traveling salesman all vanishing near the creek, all last seen with faint green lanterns glowing in the shadows. Sheriff McAllister patrolled relentlessly, trying to catch sight of the figure, to stop it. But it was never in the same place twice. Always watching, always waiting. By February, McAllister began to notice changes in himself. At night, his dreams were invaded by the lantern's glow, stretching rivers of light across endless darkness. When he closed his eyes, he could see faceless figures walking along the creek, waiting, whispering, humming. His reflection in mirrors began to shift shadowed under the eyes, faint green tints across his skin. Then one night, McAllister followed a report deeper than ever before. Beyond the frozen creek, into the dark heart of the forest, the lantern man appeared ahead, its glow brighter than ever, illuminating an impossible clearing where dozens of faceless figures knelt in the snow. The creek twisted like molten glass around them, reflecting their forms infinitely. Before McAllister could speak, The lantern floated toward him. The humming surged, vibrating his bones. Whispers invaded his mind. The creek calls. It remembers its own. The light guides the lost. He tried to step back, but his boots sank into the snow as if the ground was swallowing him. The lantern hovered in front of his face, and he saw, reflected in its light, 1,000 versions of himself, all faceless, kneeling, glowing faint green, watching, waiting. "Forever," McAllister screamed. The sound swallowed instantly by the forest. When the townsfolk found his cruiser the next morning, the engine was running, doors open. The snow was untouched. No footprints, no sign of struggle. Just the faintest green glow lingering along the frozen creek. Disappearing slowly as if the forest were breathing, Crimson Creek slept peacefully again, unaware of the horror lurking in the dark heart of its forest. But Sheriff McAllister, all who vanished near the creek were never gone. They were part of the lanterns now, added to the eternal glow, guiding others into the shadows. Forever remembered by the creek, Sheriff McAllister had been gone from the town for nearly a week, or maybe it had been months. Time in Crimson Creek no longer followed logic. It bent and twisted like the frozen creek he had once patrolled. The green glow haunted his every waking moment, now embedded in the shadows of his own home, in the reflections of windows, even in the glint of his morning coffee cup that night. Driven by a compulsion he could neither explain nor resist, McAllister returned to the creek. The snow was untouched, pristine, yet beneath it, he felt movement, tinny vibrations, as if something alive pulsed beneath the ice. His flashlight barely penetrated the mist, but he could see dozens of lantern-shaped glows flickering in the darkness, each moving independently, yet together like a single, orchestrated entity. Then the Lantern Man appeared, taller than any human, impossibly thin, its lantern glowing sickly green, illuminating a face that was not a face, a black void that seemed to swallow the light around it. It hovered just above the snow, unmoving yet undeniably alive. "You came back," it whispered, not with a voice from its mouth, but inside McAllister's skull, echoing from every corner of his mind. Before he could respond, the other lanterns shifted. Hundreds of faceless figures emerged from the snow and fog, floating silently, circling him. They were all those who had vanished before, the widow from Maple Street, the traveling salesman, the children, each one kneeling in the snow before rising again, stretching impossibly, limbs twitching unnaturally. The lantern's hum grew into a deafening chorus, vibrating his chest and skull, filling his mind with the memories of the vanished, their terror, their helplessness, their surrender. McAllister tried to turn, but his boots sank into the snow as if the ground had become liquid. Every movement he made felt slower, heavier, like the forest itself was manipulating time to trap him. A sudden, piercing whistle cut through the cacophony. McAllister looked up. The Lantern Man's light expanded, illuminating a hidden section of the creek. There, he saw Tomino, not Tommy, a faceless child, green lantern in hand, kneeling in the snow. And behind him, dozens more, all glowing, all waiting. The realization hit him like ice water. The Lantern Man was not a man. It was the guardian of the creek, the collector of lost souls, feeding off the fear and life of those who dared enter. It didn't just take them, it transformed them, binding them into its eternal chorus. "Join us," it whispered again, and this time McAllister felt a pull stronger than gravity, tugging at his limbs, bending them, stretching his body toward the ground. He struggled, screaming, but the snow around him thickened, grasping, pulling, as if the earth itself had become the lantern man's hand in a final act of defiance. McAllister lunged for the creek, smashing his flashlight into the ice. The green light fractured into 1,000 glowing shards, illuminating the faces of the lost, their mouths open in silent screams. The snow around him twisted violently, forming shapes like tendrils, wrapping around his arms and legs. His vision blurred, then split. One, I saw the creek as it had been, normal and still. The other saw it alive, pulsing, glowing with hundreds of lanterns floating in perfect, unholy alignment. Then his body began to bend, stretch, his hands elongating, fingers fusing into pale green light, his face melting into shadow. Every fiber of his being was absorbed, folded into the forest's eternal choir. His mind screamed, but no sound escaped. It became part of the lantern's chorus, another whisper in the creek's memory. When the townsfolk awoke the next morning, the creek appeared calm, frozen, untouched. The snow was pristine. No footprints, no sign of struggle, yet a faint green glow lingered on the water's surface, flickering like candlelight in the fog. And sometimes, when the night is still and the fog curls over Crimson Creek, residents swear they see green lanterns drifting through the trees, floating along the frozen water. They hear faint whistles, harmonized voices calling names they recognize, those who vanished long ago. And now, Sheriff McAllister to Dot, no one dares go near the creek after dark. Those who ignore the warnings rarely return. The lantern man waits, patient and eternal, guiding the lost into the chorus, adding their voices to the creek's endless. Green glow, Grain Creek sleeps again, unaware, but the forest remembers every soul, and the creek always calls the next one. Story 4. The Vanishing House on Hollow Ridge. Sheriff Carl. Donovan had seen a lot in his 20 years on the force in Hollow Ridge, a tiny town nestled deep in the Appalachian Hills. But nothing could have prepared him for the call he received on a crisp autumn night. The local resident, Martha Green, reported something impossible. She claimed that the abandoned house at the top of Hollow Ridge Road, the one everyone in town avoided, had changed. The house had been empty for decades, a decaying structure with boarded-up windows and graffiti-stained walls. Yet tonight, Martha swore she saw lights flickering inside and strange figures moving behind the curtains. Donovan dismissed the call at first. Hollow Ridge had its share of pranksters, and Martha Green was known for her eccentric imagination. But the urgency in her voice and the fear he could hear, it stirred something in him. He grabbed his coat and drove the winding road toward the ridge, the chill of the night biting through the cruiser's heater when he arrived. The house sat quietly at the top of the hill, its shape familiar yet subtly wrong. Windows seemed taller, doors narrower, and the roofline twisted at impossible angles. Donovan's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing faint flickers of light behind the warped glass. A voice called from inside, soft and melodic, almost hypnotic. "Carl, come closer." Every instinct screamed to turn back. The air felt thick, heavy, pressing against his chest. Leaves on the ground shifted as if moved by invisible hands. Donovan stepped forward cautiously, the crunch of his boots loud in the silence. Inside, the house was impossibly larger than it should have been. The layout defied logic. Hallways stretched endlessly. Staircases led to nowhere. Doors opened into walls. And yet, there were faint traces of life, a rocking chair moving slowly, the smell of fresh bread, a fire glowing in the hearth despite the house being abandoned. Then Donovan saw them, the residents of Hollow Ridge, or at least facsimiles of them. People who had gone missing over the past 20 years stood in the living room, frozen, pale, eyes blank. Their mouths opened as if to speak, but no sound came. They all turned toward him simultaneously, their heads tilting unnaturally. The sheriff raised his flashlight and tried to call for backup, but his radio emitted only static. The whispers started next, soft, layered, coming from every corner, every wall, every shadow. You shouldn't have come. You belong here. Donovan backed toward the front door, but the hallway seemed to stretch further than before. The door he had entered through was gone, replaced by a wall of twisting shadows. Panic surged through him, yet his feet moved forward, drawn toward a faint light at the far end of the corridor. At the end of the hall, he found a mirror. Not an ordinary mirror, but a massive pane of glass, dark and reflective, showing not his face, but the sheriff standing in the house 20 years ago, watching a little girl vanish into the walls. Donovan's heart froze. He recognized the girl. She had been the first child to disappear in Hollow Ridge, the case he had never solved. Suddenly, the shadows shifted, and the faceless residents began to move. Their elongated limbs reached toward him, whispering in voices layered and dissonant. He tried to swing his flashlight to strike them, but it passed through them like smoke. The air itself seemed to bend around him. The sheriff realized the terrifying truth. The house was alive, a predatory entity that consumed people and twisted time and space within its walls. It trapped souls, feeding on their fear, preserving them like macabre trophies. And now it had noticed him. He ran, trying every hallway, every door, but the house seemed endless. Every corridor looped back, every exit vanished. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening. A faint green glow began to creep along the edges of the walls, illuminating hundreds of faint faces staring from the wallpaper, the furniture, even the floorboards. Donovan's flashlight flickered and went out. In the darkness, the whispers became screams, echoing inside his mind. He stumbled into a room where the walls themselves appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. And then he saw her, the little girl, from the mirror, her eyes black voids, a smile stretching impossibly wide. "Welcome home, Sheriff," she whispered. The floor beneath him softened, then gave way. Donovan fell into darkness, and for a moment he felt weightless, suspended in the void between walls, time, and reality. The last thing he saw before being swallowed completely was the house itself, growing taller, twisting, stretching as if it had fed and grown stronger with his presence. When dawn broke over Hollow Ridge, the house appeared normal once more. Boards still rotted, windows still broken. The town slept peacefully, oblivious, but for those brave or foolish enough to approach the house at night, they sometimes hear a soft scratching inside, a faint whisper, and see the faintest glow behind a broken window. Sheriff Carl Donovan had vanished, joining the others trapped within the house. Another soul preserved by the living walls of Hollow Ridge Road. Sheriff Carl Donovan awoke in a space that should not exist. The walls of the vanishing house no longer resembled any building he had seen. Ceilings stretched impossibly high into darkness, floors twisted like molten wood, and hallways branched into infinity. The air was thick, damp, and carried a faint metallic scent, like rust and old blood. Every step he took seemed to echo from everywhere at once. and the faint whispering of voices threaded through the walls. Ahead, the glow of the little girl from the mirror pulsed a soft, greenish light that illuminated hundreds of faceless forms kneeling in the corridors. Some of them, the missing townsfolk Donovan had once sworn to protect. They turned toward him in unison, heads tilting unnaturally, mouths opening in silent screams. The whispers grew louder, now forming words he could barely comprehend. Join us. Become one. The house remembers its own. Donovan's heart raced, but he forced himself forward. Somewhere deep inside, he knew the house fed on fear, and fear was powerless if resisted. He remembered every case file, every disappearance, every missing person whose trail had led him here. Each was a warning, each a lesson. He had to survive, not just for himself, but for Hollow Ridge. The little girl's glow intensified, and the air vibrated with an almost musical hum. Donovan realized that she was not the enemy. She was the house's Leah, a signal to trap new souls. Summoning all his courage, he reached into his coat and pulled out his revolver. Though he knew bullets would likely do nothing, it was a symbol of resistance. He fired. The gunshot echoed through the twisted halls, shattering some of the mirrored surfaces. A ripple ran through the faceless figures. They faltered for the first time, their kneeling forms bending and wobbling as if the house itself were unsteady. Then the house roared, walls bending violently, doors slamming into each other. The floor beneath Donovan opened into a pit of endless darkness, and hands of shadow shot up to grab him. The little girl's glow hovered beside him, guiding, almost protective. "Follow me," she whispered. Donovan leaped, letting instinct guide him. He ran down a narrow hallway that stretched impossibly, the walls bending to try to trap him. Faceless figures lunged, but he dodged, rolling through warped corridors. Every door he passed led to infinite rooms, but he kept running, guided by that greenish glow. Finally, he reached the front of the house, or what seemed like the front. But the porch stretched far beyond normal dimensions, suspended above a black void. Donovan froze. The little girl floated beside him, her voice urgent, "Jump, or stay forever." He hesitated only a second before sprinting and leaping. Time stretched. He fell through the darkness, weightless, until he landed in the snowy clearing outside, the house behind him appearing normal, decayed and silent. His chest heaved. The whispers were gone. The glow had vanished. He looked around. Hollow Ridge was quiet. The town slept peacefully, unaware of the horror that had just released him. But as Donovan rose, brushing snow from his coat, he noticed a faint shimmer across the ground, like green lantern light reflecting off the ice. He realized the terrifying truth. The vanishing house did not need to move to capture souls. It could reach beyond its walls, calling out to the fearful, manipulating reality. Any night, anyone who approached recklessly could be drawn inside. Added to its endless collection, Sheriff Donovan returned to the station, shaken but alive. His hands shook as he typed up the report. He left details vague, filing it under unsolved disappearances, adding his own name to the list of those who knew too much. But nights in Hollow Ridge were no longer peaceful. Donovan could feel it in his dreams. Faint whispers, twisting corridors, greenish glows just at the edge of vision. He had survived, but part of him, perhaps, had never left the vanishing house at all. And for those who dared climb Hollow Ridge Road on a cold, quiet night, some still swear they see lights flickering inside the boarded-up windows. Some hear the softest scratching, faint whispers calling their names. And if they listened too closely, they might just see the sheriff's silhouette inside, staring, waiting, silently guiding the house's next victims. Hollow Ridge had its secrets, and the vanishing house had forever added Donovan to its legacy. Story 5. The prisoner who never existed by the time Sheriff Daniel Crow took over the badge in the town of Millstone. The jail was already older than the road leading to it. The concrete walls were thick, windowless, and built back when the town still believed iron and stone could keep anything contained. Millstone was quiet, too quiet for a place surrounded by woods on all sides. No highway passed through it. People came here only if they were born here, or if they had nowhere else to go. That was why. When a man appeared on the outskirts of town one winter morning, barefoot, bleeding, and screaming for help, Crow knew something was wrong immediately. The man collapsed just outside the general store, sobbing uncontrollably. He wore no coat, no identification, and his skin was ice cold, as if he had been outside for days. Over and over, he repeated the same sentence. He's still in the cell. You didn't lock it right. Crow brought him in for questioning. The man refused water, refused food. Every time Crow tried to ask his name, the man recoiled as if the sound itself hurt him. Who's still in the cell? Crow asked. The man's eyes widened in terror. You don't know. God help you. You don't know. Before Crow could press further, the man began convulsing violently, his mouth filled with blood. Within minutes, he was dead. No cause, no explanation. That should have been the end of it. But that same night, as Crow locked up the station, he noticed something impossible. One of the holding cells was occupied. The door was shut. The light inside was on. Crow stood frozen in the hallway, heart pounding. He knew every person in custody. He always logged arrests personally. And yet, there was a man sitting calmly on the bench inside cell 3.middle-aged. Clean clothes, hands folded, watching him. Crow unlocked the door cautiously. Sir, he said, forcing his voice steady. You need to tell me how you got in here. The man smiled gently. You arrested me, he said. Crow frowned. That's not possible. The man tilted his head. It already happened. You just don't remember yet. Crow checked the logs. No arrest record. No name. No fingerprints. The man's hands were smooth. No prints at all. Who are you? Crow asked. The man's smile never faded. I stay where I'm put, he said. That's the agreement. Crow felt a chill crawl up his spine. Agreement with who? With Millstone, the man replied. Crow locked the cell and left the hallway, telling himself exhaustion was playing tricks on him. Old buildings did strange things. Old towns even more so. But when he returned in the morning, cell 3 was empty. No signs of escape. No broken lock, just a message scratched into the concrete wall from the inside. You left eye too open before. Crow tried to ignore it. He shouldn't have, because over the next week, people in Millstone began disappearing, not violently. Not suddenly, they simply walked into the woods and never came back. And every time someone vanished, the man returned to cell 3, sitting quietly, waiting, watching Crow like a clock counting down. On the 7th night, Crow finally asked the question he'd been avoiding. What happens if I don't keep you locked up? The man looked at him with something close to pity. Then Millstone remembers what it used to be, he said softly. and it takes back what it gave. That night, the cell door unlocked itself, and from somewhere deep beneath the jail, Crow heard something move for the first time. Sheriff Daniel Crow did not sleep that night. The sound he'd heard beneath the jail, heavy, deliberate, echoed through his thoughts like a distant heartbeat. The cell door to cell 3 remained open, hanging slightly crooked, as if it had been unlocked from the inside and gently pushed outward. The prisoner was gone. Crow checked every room in the station, offices, storage, evidence. Nothing yet. The air inside the building felt wrong, thicker, older, like the walls were holding their breath at dawn. He walked the town. Millstone looked unchanged. Shops opened. People greeted him politely. But Crow noticed things he hadn't before. Houses with boarded windows no one remembered living in. A playground rusted beyond reason. Names carved into trees that matched missing persons. Reports stretching back decades. He went to the town records office. What he found made his stomach turn. Millstone's population numbers never changed, no matter the year, no matter the decade. People were born. People vanished. But the total stayed the same. As Crow flipped through older sheriff logs, his hands began to shake. Names repeated, same handwriting, same cases, separated by decades, different sheriffs, same events. A man found wandering and terrified. A death with no explanation. A prisoner appearing without arrest. Disappearances into the woods, and then, always, a final entry. Cell secured. Balance restored. Crow drove back to the jail at full speed. Cell 3 was occupied again. The man sat inside. Exactly as before, hands folded, calm. "You shouldn't have left it open," the prisoner said gently. Crow slammed the bars shut. "What are you?" The man finally looked. "Tired. I'm what stays," he said. "I'm what's left behind so the rest of you can go on pretending this is a town." Crow demanded answers, so the man told him the truth. Millstone wasn't built where it was by accident. Long before roads or records, something lived in the woods, something that fed on people, slowly, endlessly. The settlers made a deal. They built walls. They built laws. They built a jail. And they gave the town a warden, not a man, a role. One soul to contain the hunger beneath Millstone. One presence locked away so the rest could live free. The prisoner was never the same person. He wore faces, voices, memories. He was whoever the town needed him to be, and when sheriffs forget, the man continued softly. When they leave the cell open, the woods collect payment. Crow backed away, horror settling in his chest. Then why me? The man smiled sadly. Because the last sheriff is tired. The lights flickered from beneath the floor. Something shifted, again closer now, louder, a scraping, like roots dragging through stone. Crow realized then what the sound was. The jail wasn't built on the thing, it was built around it. And cell 3 wasn't a cage, it was a lock. Prisoner stood for the first time. "I can't stay anymore," he said. "But you can." The door opened, not outward, inward. Crow felt the weight of the town press into him, every disappearance, every lie. Every night Millstone survived, because someone else paid the price. The walls whispered his name. The floor swallowed his shadow by morning. The jail was quiet. The new sheriff freshly appointed. unfamiliar with the town's past, noticed something odd during his first inspection. Cell 3 was occupied. A man sat inside, calm and watchful. When asked his name, he smiled gently. "I stay where I'm put," he said. That night, the woods were silent and millstones slept peacefully. Story 6. The case that kept reopening itself. Sheriff Miles Harrington took pride in one thing above all else. His case files were clean in the small town of Ravens Fork. Nothing stayed unsolved for long. A missing cow, a bar fight, a suspicious fire, everything eventually found its explanation. Harrington believed chaos only existed where people stopped paying attention. That belief began to crack the morning he found case file number 217 back on his desk. The folder was old yellowed edges, outdated forms, handwritten notes instead of typed reports. Harrington frowned. He hadn't used that style of paperwork in over a decade. He opened it. Case number 217 status. Opium victim, unknown date, November 3rd cause. Uncertain, assigned officer, Sheriff Miles. Harrington, his stomach tightened. November 3rd was today. The report beneath it described a crime scene. Harrington hadn't yet visited down to the address, weather conditions, and a body found near the river bend east of town. He checked the clock. 8:12 a.m. At 8:47 a.m. Dispatch called it in. A jogger had found a body near the river bend east of town. Harrington drove there in silence, the file sitting on the passenger seat like a quiet accusation. The scene was exactly as described. Same position of the body, same torn jacket, same strange marking on the victim's wrist, shallow lines carved into the skin like tally marks. Harrington felt something cold settle behind his eyes. This wasn't a coincidence. Back at the station, he reviewed the rest of case #217. The timeline stretched forward. Events that hadn't happened yet were documented in calm. Official language, witness statements not yet given. Evidence not yet collected. A suspect interview scheduled for tomorrow. At the end of the file was a single handwritten note. Not in his handwriting. "You already tried to stop this." Harrington locked the folder in his desk and told no one by evening. Another thing went wrong. A call came in reporting a break-in at the old Marlowe house, abandoned since the 90s. Harrington hadn't thought about that place in years, but when he arrived, the front door was open, and inside, sitting at the dining table, was a man calmly reading a folder. Case file number 217. "You're early this time," the man said without looking up. Harrington drew his gun. "Who are you?" The man smiled faintly. "You arrested me before. Every time." "What do you mean, every time?" The man closed the folder and finally looked at him. His face was ordinary to ordinary, the kind of face that vanished from memory the moment you looked away. "I'm the ending," he said, "and you keep trying to rewrite the middle." Harrington felt dizzy. "Rewrite what?" The man stood. "The case," he replied. "The town, yourself." Harrington stepped back as the lights in the Marlowe house flickered. On the walls, shadows moved independently of their sources, replaying scenes like memories burned into plaster, arrests, interrogations, a body by the river, and always Harrington at the center. The man leaned closer. "You reopen the file," he whispered, "and everything starts again." From the man's wrist, Harrington saw 3 shallow scars, identical to the victim's. The floor creaked behind him, and Harrington realized he wasn't alone in the house. Asterisk. Sheriff Miles Harrington did not turn around. The creak behind him echoed again, slow and deliberate, like someone pacing just out of sight. The man across the room, the one holding case file number 217, watched him calmly, as if this moment had already happened exactly as planned. "You brought your gun every time," the man said. "You never use it." Harrington spun, weapon raised. The dining room was empty. No footsteps. No shadows. Just dust hanging in the stale air. "What is this place?" Harrington demanded. "A hinge," the man replied softly, "between what was and what refuses to stay buried." The walls of the Marlowe house began to change. Paint peeled away in long, silent strips, revealing older layers beneath newspaper clippings, photographs, handwritten reports. Harrington stepped closer and felt his breath. Catch. They were his reports, years' worth of them. Some dated in the future, others dated decades back, before he was even born. "You think you're solving a crime," the man said, "but you're maintaining a structure." The house groaned, settling like something waking from sleep. Harrington remembered then flashes he had never trusted before. Dreams of standing by the river bend at night, the same body over and over, the same tally marks carved into skin. Every time he felt certainty. Every time dread followed. "How many times?" Harrington whispered. The man's smile faded, enough that Raven's Fork stopped noticing. The truth came slowly, painfully. Raven's Fork had not always existed as a town. Long ago, something had happened by the river, something violent, unresolved, and unseen. The land absorbed it, time bent around it. People settled there later, unknowingly building their lives atop a looped wound in reality. The case was the shape that wound took, a ritual of procedure, a body, an investigation, a conclusion that never truly closed. Sheriffs came and went, but Miles Harrington stayed, because he always tried to fix it. "And every time you get close," the man continued, "you fracture it further." Harrington's head pounded. "Then why me?" "Because you're consistent," the man said, "and because you never stop caring." The floor beneath them trembled. From the hallway came movement, slow, dragging footsteps. Figures emerged from the shadows, pale and indistinct, their faces blurred like smudged ink. Harrington recognized them instantly. Former victims, former witnesses, former sheriffs, all trapped in the case. The man opened case file number 217 and turned to the last page. "Final status. Closed, but it never stays that way," Harrington said. The man nodded. "Not unless you stop reopening it." Harrington understood then what the tally marks meant. They weren't kills, they were iterations. "How does it end?" Harrington asked. The man stepped closer and placed the file in Harrington's hands. "It doesn't," he said, "unless someone stays." The figures advanced. The walls closed in. The house screamed not loudly, but internally, like pressure snapping bone, Harrington felt the weight of every version of himself pressed down at once. Every failed attempt, every report filed with hope instead of truth. He looked at the man one last time. "What happens to you?" The man smiled sadly. "I become the warning," he said, "just like you will." The next morning, Raven's Fork woke to a quiet town. No body by the river, no missing jogger, no call to dispatch. Case File number 217 sat in a locked cabinet, marked closed, its edges pristine. The new sheriff, young, confident through old records, and paused. He frowned. There was a missing span of years, no record of Sheriff Miles Harrington's retirement, no death certificate, just a single photograph clipped to an old report. A man standing inside the Marlowe house, watching, waiting, and on his wrist, 3 shallow marks. Story 7. The sheriff who stopped receiving calls in the town of Ridge Hollow. Silence was normal, not peaceful silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Thick and watchful, like something listening back. Ridge Hollow sat deep in a forested valley. Population barely 900. No highway cut through it. No cell towers reached clean signal. Radios worked most days. Phones rang when they felt like it. And for over 20 years, Sheriff Daniel Crow was the only reason the town slept at night. Crow wasn't a big man. He didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't drink on duty like the sheriffs before him. He simply listened to people, to patterns, to things that didn't feel right. And then, one night, his phone stopped ringing. The first missed call lit happened on October 17th. Just after 11:40 p.m., Crow was sitting at his kitchen table. Paperwork spread out, radio humming low beside him. Outside, the wind pushed through the trees in slow, uneven waves. That's when the radio crackled. "Sheriff, you there?" The voice was faint, distorted, not dispatch. Crow leaned closer. "Go ahead." Silence. Then a soft click. Crow frowned. Ridge Hollow only had one dispatch operator at night, Martha. Keenan, she never sounded like that. He reached for the phone to call her. No. Dial tone. He checked the second line. Dead. That wasn't unusual. Storms knocked lines out all the time. Still, something about the timing bothered him. 10 minutes later, he heard knocking, not on the door. On the window, 3 slow taps. Crow stood, hand resting on his holster. The window faced the woods. No porch. No path. He pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, just trees. And darkness thick enough to feel solid. When he turned back, the radio was on again. Sheriff Crow. "You missed it." Crow froze. "That you, Martha?" he asked. The radio hissed. "Then, they're calling again." The radio shut off by itself. The dead Zoe on ebb by morning. The town noticed phones weren't working. Not just landlines. Cell phones too. No signal bars. No emergency calls. Even the old payphone outside the diner was silent. "Sheriff." Crow drove to the station. Martha Keene wasn't there. Her car was parked out front. Engine cold. Keys still inside. Her headset lay on the desk. Cord tangled like it had been pulled off in a hurry. On her notepad, one sentence was written over and over. Harder each time. "They won't stop calling." Crow radioed for county backup. No response. He drove to the edge of town, where the signal usually returned. Nothing. Ridge Hollow was cut off. The calls that never ranged that night. Reports began coming in person. An elderly man claimed his phone rang all night. But when he picked up, he heard his own voice breathing. A mother swore she heard her missing son leave. A voicemail at 2:13 a.m. Her phone showed no missed calls. At the nursing home, residents woke screaming, insisting phones were ringing inside their rooms, though none were there. Every report shared one detail. The calls never showed up on any device. No record. No log. No sound except to the person hearing it. And every voice on the other end knew things. Personal things. Things only the dead should. No, the first BODYN, the third night. They found Eli Harmon. Eli was the town drunk. Loud, careless. Always dialing the wrong number on the bar's rotary phone. He was found in the phone booth outside the diner door shut. Receiver off the hook. Mouth open like he'd been screaming. His eyes were wide. And his eardrums were ruptured. No signs of a struggle, no blood anywhere else. Just a voicemail recorder placed beside his body. It wasn't plugged in, but it was playing, over and over, a whisper. Layered beneath static, you answered, the sheriff's SECRT that night. Crow didn't go home. He sat alone in his office, lights off, radio unplugged, phone lines cut. He stared at the wall where an old plaque hung. A memorial from 1998.20-7 names. A factory fire, officially ruled an accident. Unofficially. Something Crow never talked about, because he was the one who'd ordered the phone lines shut down that night. He told himself it was to prevent panic, but the truth was, darker, the calls had started then too, and he had ignored them. The phone that shouldn't W2:17 a.m. Crow heard it. A ring, soft, close. From the desk drawer, he slowly opened it. Inside was an old black phone rotary. Unplugged, no cord attached. It rang anyway. Crow didn't move. The ringing stopped. Then the phone spoke. "You finally remembered us, Sheriff," Crow whispered. "I shut the lines for a reason," the voice replied, "and now we're calling back." The phone rang again. This time, the sound wasn't coming from the receiver. It was coming from inside the walls. Asterisk. The ringing didn't stop. It didn't grow louder either. It stayed at the exact volume where ignoring it felt impossible. Sheriff Daniel. Crow stood alone in his office as the sound crawled through the walls. Under the floorboards, inside the ceiling vents. It was everywhere and nowhere at once. He unplugged the generator. The lights died. The ringing continued. That's when Crow understood the truth he'd been avoiding for 25 years. The calls weren't coming through the lines. They were coming through him. The night Ridge Hollow, RAMMBR, by dawn. Half the town was gathered outside the sheriff's station. No one had slept. People stood in silence, eyes sunken, faces pale. Some clutched phones that never rang. Others refused to touch them at all. A teenage girl rocked back and forth, whispering, "He told me to answer. He told me he was cold." Her brother had died in the 1998 factory fire. Crow stepped outside. Every conversation stopped. Looked at him the way people look at a man who already knows the ending. A woman stepped forward. Martha Keene's sister. "Where is she?" she asked. Crow opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Behind him, the station radio, still unplugged, crackled to life. Dispatcher Martha Keene, responding. Martha's voice echoed through the open doorway. The crowd turned. Someone screamed. The radio continued. Call accepted. The truth about the FIR. Recro locked himself back inside and pulled the old case files from storage. Ridge Hollow processing plant, official cause, electrical fault. Unofficial reality, overcapacity, locked exits, ignored warnings, the night of the fire. Emergency lines had been flooded. Calls came in faster than dispatch could log. Voices screaming, phones melting, operators breaking down. Crow had made a decision. He ordered the lines shut down to regain control. People were still alive when the phones went dead. Some were calling from inside the building, some from locked offices, some from phones that never stopped ringing after the fire ended. Crow never answered. Why the calls? Ari to Ara, neither factory. Site had been demolished years ago, but no one built on it. No one camped there. Animals avoided it because the ground remembered. And now something had changed. Earlier that week, the town council approved a new cell tower installed directly on the old factory land. A tower meant to connect Ridge Hollow to the outside world. Instead, it completed a circuit. The sheriff starts ANSWRING that night. Crow sat alone at his desk. He picked up the black rotary phone. It was warm. The first voice came instantly. A man coughing through smoke. I can't see the door, the voice said. They locked it, Sheriff. Crow swallowed hard. I know. The line went silent. The phone rang again. A woman this time, calm to calm. My daughter's phone keeps ringing, she said. Can you tell her to stop calling me? Crow closed his eyes. She's dead, he whispered. So are you, the voice replied. The phone rang again, and again, and again. Crow answered every call. Each one peeled something away: his breath, his strength, his memories. Outside, the town began to change. The town without PHONS people who answered the calls didn't die immediately. First, they stopped sleeping. Then they stopped speaking. Then they started standing near phones that weren't ringing. By the fourth night, Ridge Hollow looked abandoned. Cars idled in driveways. Lights stayed on. Receivers hung off hooks. The sound of ringing filled the air, but only some people could hear it. Crow knew what came next. The final K-lodge before sunrise. The black phone rang one last time. Crow answered no. Static, no whisper, just silence. Then his own voice spoke back, colder, tired, breaking. You can still stop this. Crow understood. The calls needed a dispatcher. Someone to listen. Someone to answer. Someone to stay. Crow walked outside, carrying the phone. The tower loomed over the old factory land, blinking red in the fog. Phones all across Ridge Hollow rang at once, then silence. Every signal bar returned. Every phone stopped. Crow walked into the fog. No one saw him again. 1 year later. Hollow has full service now. Tourists pass through. New families move in. No one talks about the sheriff, but sometimes late at night. Phones ring once. No missed call appears. No voicemail is left, except on the sheriff's old office phone. It still works, and if you listen closely, you can hear breathing, waiting for the next call to be answered. Story 8. The sheriff, who heard the whole town scream, Sheriff Laura Vance had seen things in Ridge Hollow that made men like Crow flinch. She wasn't afraid of fire, flooding, or freak accidents. She was afraid of sound. Not ordinary sound, but the kind that whispers in your skull when the world is silent. When nothing else should be listening, yet you know it is. The case began with a call she couldn't ignore. It was midnight. A family from the edge of town, a small farmhouse surrounded by thick pines, begged for help over the phone. The mother's voice trembled. It's happening again. Please. You have to come." When Vance arrived, the house was empty. Windows open, doors swinging in the wind. Inside, the air vibrated with whispers, a chorus of screams layered high, low, desperate, angry, pleading, coming from the walls, the ceiling, the floorboards. The sound pressed against her eardrums, filling her head with static pain. Her flashlight flickered. Shadows moved in ways the light didn't touch. In the corner, she saw it, a room that shouldn't exist. No door, no outline, yet a black doorway stretched into infinite darkness, humming with screams. Neighbors later reported strange phenomena. Dogs barked at empty fields, windows rattled with no wind, phones rang with no calls. Every time Vance investigated, she found nothing except one thing. The sound followed her home. At night, in her own bedroom, echoes began again. Screams from every town in Ridge Hollow, every house. Every victim from every unresolved case, all screaming, all reaching, all trapped inside something that listened to them as much as they listened to it. The origin revealed itself weeks later at an abandoned water tower at the center of town. Condemned since the 1970s. No one had been inside in decades. When she climbed it, she could hear everything. The tower wasn't a building. It was a receptor, a collector of pain. Every scream from every past tragedy in Ridge Hollow had been absorbed by its walls. Fires, drownings, disappearances, trapped in sound waves, bouncing endlessly. And now, someone, or something, was amplifying it. That night, Deputy Miles Harker called, "Sheriff, you have to hear this." The line went dead. When Vance arrived, Harker was gone. His patrol car sat under the streetlight, doors locked, keys in the ignition. Inside, the radio static was screaming. She recognized his voice layered beneath dozens of others, shrieking endlessly. The deputy had become part of the tower. An old resident, 92 and blind, came to her trembling. "The town? It's never been ours. It belongs to the screams. They just let us live in the cracks between them," he whispered, naming what she would never forget, the listener. Vance didn't sleep. Every night, the screaming grew louder. She could hear every thought, every fear, every hidden secret in Ridge Hollow. She could not turn it off. Finally, she stood at the water tower steps, phone in hand. Every call she had ever ignored, every case she had ever closed, every victim left unresolved. They were screaming. The listener was patient. It wanted attention. It wanted someone who would answer for all of them. She had a choice: climb inside and face the screams, risking everything, or walk away, leaving the town trapped in perpetual auditory torment. The wind whispered her name as she climbed. By the top, the horizon was black. The town beneath looked peaceful, innocent, but she knew it was a lie. She knew the screams were waiting. Sheriff Laura Vance climbed the metal steps of the water tower, each one groaning under her weight, each one echoing a chorus of voices so faint she almost didn't hear them over the wind. By the time she reached the top, the town stretched below her, silent and unaware of what waited in the night, unaware of the horror she was about to face. The wind whipped around her, carrying whispers and moans from every corner of Ridge Hollow. Every house, every street, every unsolved tragedy. They called to her. They demanded her attention. The listener had waited 25 years for someone brave enough, for foolish enough to answer. She stepped onto the platform, the beams trembling beneath her, and held the black rotary phone in her hand. The cordless relic was warm, vibrating as though alive. She answered, and instantly the voices surged into her mind. Children screaming from the fire, mothers crying for lost sons, men begging for escape from drowning and disease, deputies calling for help on nights that had long passed. Their voices were layered, each one distinct, yet blending into a single unbearable roar. She tried to block them out, but the listener had made her mind a conduit, and it would not allow silence. One voice spoke clearly, cutting through the chaos. It was her own older, weary, trembling. "You can still stop this," it whispered. Vance realized it was not just the voices of the dead she heard. It was the echo of herself, the reflection of her fears, her failures, her guilt. Every victim she had failed to save, every call unanswered, every moment she had doubted herself had been preserved, collected, and twisted by the listener. The town's horrors had been waiting, patient, until someone would confront them. She stepped closer to the edge, feeling the wind claw at her clothes, the cries pressing like hands on her skull. The platform beneath her seemed to dissolve. She looked down and saw not the ground, but infinite darkness, black waves of shadows reaching up as if they were alive. Shapes of missing townspeople rose from the void. Transparent but unmistakable children with hollow eyes, men with twisted faces, women whose screams were forever caught in their throats. They reached for her, not in violence, but in desperate pleading. They wanted release, a voice to answer their calls, someone to bear the weight of their torment. Vance realized that to stop the screams, she had to become the conduit fully. She had to absorb everything, let the listener use her as the medium. With trembling hands, she pressed the phone to her ear and spoke. The words that emerged were not hers, but theirs. Every name, every scream, every plea, every secret of Ridge Hollow flowing through her mouth in a torrent of sound. Her knees buckled. The wind became a hurricane of sound and static. The platform shook violently. The phone began to glow, pulsing in rhythm with the screams. Her body felt like it was splitting apart, but still she spoke. The town below remained quiet, ignorant, but for the first time in decades, the voices were being heard by someone who could contain them. Then the darkness surged upward, and she fell. Not onto the ground, not into the air, but into the void the tower had become. She felt herself stretch, elongate, twist into the screaming chorus itself. For a moment, she panicked, but then she understood. She had become the listener's vessel. She carried the town's pain, its tragedies, its voices, and, in doing so, the outside world went silent. Ridge Hollow remained unaware. Its nights finally calm, its phone lines dead, its people alive and unbothered, though forever haunted by the memory of fear they could not recall. Somewhere in the darkness, she caught a glimpse of her own reflection, hollow eyes, a face split with anguish and purpose. She could feel every scream, every cry, every unspoken word, and she knew she would never escape. She was now both sheriff and listener, protector and prisoner, the sole anchor between Ridge Hollow and the infinite chorus of its dead. Years later, travelers passing the town sometimes noticed strange phenomena. Phones off the hook in abandoned houses, faint murmurs on radios that should have been dead, lights flickering in empty windows. But no one stayed long enough to investigate. Those who did left with a feeling that the town itself was alive, listening and waiting. And somewhere in the darkness, Sheriff Laura Vance continued to answer the calls. Every scream, every whisper, Every echo of horror in Ridge Hollow flowed through her, and she would never stop listening. The wind carries it still. If you stand at the edge of town on a silent night, you can almost hear it, a chorus of voices calling for someone to answer, and the faintest whisper of a woman's voice saying, "I hear you. I will not let you be forgotten," and then silence until the next call comes. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. Terramouth.